Pacific Ocean Park outdrew Disneyland in its first 6 days. 20,000 people packed a starfish-shaped gate on opening day for diving bells, glass gondolas gliding over the surf, and an ocean fantasy world built by actual Hollywood set designers. Within a decade, it was gone. Pilings snapped, rides sank into black water. Buildings burned to the waterline. The ocean didn't swallow Pacific Ocean Park. Something else got there first. To understand how that happens, go back to 1956, to a rundown wooden pier straddling the border between Santa Monica and Venice, California. It had been standing since the 20s, and by the mid-50s, it looked every bit its age. Peeling paint, creaking rides, the kind of place parents took their kids because it was there, not because it was special. One of the last surviving pieces of the old Southern California beach carnival scene. The kind of amusement pier that used to line this coast and was slowly fading out of it. And two companies looked at that tired old pier and saw something else entirely. CBS and the Los Angeles Turf Club, the company behind the Santa Anita racetrack, joined forces and leased the whole thing. Their timing wasn't random. A year earlier, a park in Anaheim called Disneyland had opened and rewritten the rules for what a family attraction could be. And a park called Marineland had opened along the coast the year before that. CBS and the Turf Club didn't want to compete with the old boardwalk model anymore. They wanted to beat Disney at his own game, with something Disney simply didn't have: water and everything you could build around it. So they tore the old pier down to the pilings and started over. And here's what made this project different. They didn't hire carnival people. They hired more than 80 Hollywood scenic artists and special effects technicians, the same kind who built movie sets and studio backlots for a living. Art direction went to Fred Hartman, who had worked on Disneyland's Main Street just a few years earlier. He knew exactly what kind of fantasy this business demanded. He just built his version underwater, on steel, over open ocean. The result was something nobody in Southern California had seen before. A single ticket got you into an entire ocean world. You could descend by elevator into Neptune's Kingdom, a fake submarine ride through glowing sea corridors sponsored by Coca-Cola. You could ride twin diving bells that hissed underwater and burst back to the surface. You could float half a mile out over the Pacific in a glass gondola on the ocean skyway, watching the whole park shrink beneath you. There was a sea circus with trained dolphins and sea lions performing for 2,000 people at a time. A banana train wound through Mystery Island. A Stratoliner tower spun cars overhead. Westinghouse put in an exhibit with a robot from the 1939 World's Fair standing inside it. Union 76 sponsored a ride. This wasn't a boardwalk with a fresh coat of paint. It was corporate America's answer to Walt Disney, built on stilts over the sea. And for a moment, the bet paid off. Pacific Ocean Park opened on July 28, 1958, with admission set at 90 cents a head. 20,000 people showed up on day one, along with a wave of Hollywood celebrities. The next day, a Sunday, 37,262 paying guests jammed the entrance, backing up traffic for blocks. For its first 6 days, Pacific Ocean Park actually outperformed Disneyland. Sit with that. A park built on a wooden pier in a city that already had one dying amusement zone nearby was briefly beating the most famous theme park on the planet. But there was already a problem built into the park before a single guest walked through that starfish gate. To hit budget, the builders didn't replace everything. 6 rides from the old, decrepit pier, including a roller coaster, a carousel, a fun house, a glass house, and those same diving bells, got folded straight into the new park instead of being built fresh. It made financial sense on paper. In practice, it meant Pacific Ocean Park opened with some of its bones already old in the most corrosive environment a ride can be built in. Salt air, salt spray, ocean wind eating at steel that wasn't new to begin with, day and night without a break. Nobody was clapping for that detail on opening weekend, but it was already ticking underneath the fantasy. For a while, none of that mattered, because the crowds kept coming. That first partial season alone, 1958, still drew 683,000 people through a park that had only been open a few months. By the start of 1959, the total climbed past 1.1 million visitors. Families made it a summer tradition. School buses stopped there. It became the kind of place people just assumed would always be around, the way you assume the ocean will always be there. Television treated it that way too. Pacific Ocean Park turns up in Route 66, The Twilight Zone, The Fugitive, Get Smart, The Mod Squad. In 1962, it hosted the Miss Teen USA pageant, crowning a 15-year-old from South Dakota in front of a packed crowd. This wasn't a regional curiosity. It was a genuine cultural fixture of Southern California life, the kind of place that ended up in family photo albums and kitchen drawer brochures across the region, kept around long after the ticket stub was gone. Attendance kept climbing through the early 60s, and in 1964 it hit its absolute peak. 1,663,013 visitors in a single year, a number that stands out even more once you know what was happening behind the scenes at the exact same time. That's the number Pacific Ocean Park would never beat again, and nobody inside the park knew that yet. It just looked like proof that the gamble against Disneyland had paid off, except the numbers were hiding something. As early as 1959, the year right after opening, attendance had already slipped below its first partial season. An internal report from a firm called Marco Engineering told management flat out that annual attendance would not exceed 1 million unless serious changes were made to the rides and the layout. That warning was largely ignored. The rides kept running. The gondolas kept going out over the water. Why fix what still looks like a success from the outside? Because underneath the good years, two problems were quietly compounding. The first was that saltwater environment, corroding the same rides year after year, faster than any inland park would have to deal with. The second was worse, because it was about money, not weather. Many ride concessionaires operated on guaranteed percentage deals, paid a cut of the gate whether their ride worked or not. A broken ride cost the operator almost nothing to simply leave broken, so there was no real pressure to fix it. Things that broke down stayed broken down. Guests walked past dead attractions on their way to the ones that still worked, and every one of them chipped away a little more at the fantasy the park had been built to sell. The neighborhood outside the gates was changing too. Old buildings that hadn't been part of the rebuild kept aging, and the boardwalk picked up a rougher reputation. The kind of trouble that makes a parent nervous about bringing the kids after dark. On top of that, this was still fundamentally a beach business. Rain and cold kept the gates thin in the off-season, with no real year-round revenue to fall back on. Nothing indoor to lean on the way an inland park could. None of it alone was fatal. A pier park with rusting rides and a fraying neighborhood is a park with real problems. It is not yet a park with a death sentence. That part was still coming, and it wasn't going to come from a competitor. It started with the people who built the place deciding they didn't want it anymore. Attendance in year 2 had already dropped below year 1, and CBS and the Turf Club, watching a supposed Disneyland rival limp along with dying rides and a fraying budget, decided the venture had been a mistake. In 1960, they sold out entirely to a single buyer named Jack Morehart. The sale was structured in a way later picked apart in U.S. tax court. in Santa Anita Consolidated versus Commissioner, the kind of paper trail that tells you this wasn't a proud handoff. It was two companies quietly getting out from under a losing bet. That sounded like it might help, one owner instead of a corporate committee. Morehart simplified admission into a single-pay, one-price ticket, easier to sell, easier for a family to understand at the gate. He also announced plans for 4 new attractions, a $2 million expansion meant to give the aging park a real reason for people to come back. Only 2 of them actually got built: Space Wheels, a pair of oversized Ferris wheels, and Fun Forest, a small children's area. The other half of the plan simply never happened. For a moment, Focus looked like it might succeed where 2 big corporate names hadn't. It just wasn't the full comeback anyone had been promised. It wasn't enough. By 1963, Morehart split the park financially, selling the northern section to investor Irving Kay for $7.5 million. Fresh capital, another moment that looked from the outside like a rescue finally arriving. It collapsed almost immediately. Kay looked at the books and decided the park was, in his own words, hopelessly insolvent. By 1965, he was suing to get his money back, actively working, in court, against the survival of the property he'd just bought into. The rescue plan hadn't rescued anything. It had just added a second landlord who wanted out as fast as he'd gotten in. Then, in early 1964, Morehart sold the southern half too, to longtime concessionaire Jack Roberts. So at the exact moment Pacific Ocean Park was posting its best attendance ever, 1.6 million people that same year, the park was legally split between 2 separate owners who didn't fully trust what they'd bought or each other. The crowds had never been bigger. The paperwork underneath them had never been shakier. The year that looks most triumphant from the outside is often the year the cracks are spreading fastest underneath, out of sight of anyone standing in line for a ride. Then came the blow nobody at the park could outmarket. In 1965, the city of Santa Monica launched the Ocean Park Redevelopment Project. On paper, it was neighborhood revitalization, clearing aging blocks around the pier for new apartment towers. City officials weren't trying to kill Pacific Ocean Park. That was never the intention. But redevelopment meant demolition, closed streets, and a construction zone sitting exactly where families used to park and walk in. The plan sounded massive. New streets, new high-rises, a modernized coastline promised to lift the whole neighborhood, park included. Almost none of that lift ever reached the park itself. Visitors physically could not get there the way they used to. Attendance, which had just peaked at 1.6 million, fell to 621,000 in 1965, then to 398,700 in 1966. In 2 years, the park lost more than 3/4 of its audience, not to a rival park or a shift in taste, but to bulldozers a few blocks away, clearing land for buildings that had nothing to do with Pacific Ocean Park at all. By then, Jack Roberts had stopped paying his bills. In 1967, Santa Monica sued him over just $17,000 in back rent, a small number for a park that had drawn 1.5 million people a few years earlier, and an even smaller number compared to what it would ultimately cost the city to clean up what came after. And that lawsuit was the final push. It tipped the park into involuntary bankruptcy. The park that once beat Disneyland in its opening week closed for good on October 6, 1967. Even then, it didn't go quickly. The following June in 1968, 36 rides and 16 games were auctioned off piece by piece to pay creditors. Picture what that looked like on the ground. The Ocean Skyway gondolas, the diving bells, the sea circus equipment, sold individually, hauled away by whoever placed the winning bid, scattered across salvage yards and private buyers with no connection to each other. Pacific Ocean Park wasn't demolished in one dramatic act you could point a camera at. It was quietly dismantled, sold for parts, years before a wrecking ball ever showed up. What was left behind was worse than empty. It was open. The gutted structures sat for years in jurisdictional limbo between Santa Monica, Los Angeles, and the state, nobody agreeing on who was responsible for tearing the rest down. The ruins just stood there, a starfish gate with nothing behind it, catwalks with missing boards, drained tanks where dolphins used to perform, the shells of buildings that used to hold a submarine ride and a dolphin show, all of it slowly rotting a few hundred feet from where sunbathers still spread their towels on an ordinary afternoon. Transients moved in. The place that had sold itself as a clean, corporate fantasy turned back into exactly the kind of wreck the old pier had been in 1956, before anyone tried to fix it. But the ruins found a second life nobody at CBS or the Turf Club could have planned for. Right next door, the old Aragon Ballroom on Lick Pier had been reborn as a rock club called the Cheetah, and for about a year it hosted some genuinely historic shows, early gigs by the Doors, and Pink Floyd's American debut tour in November of 1967, just weeks after Pacific Ocean Park itself had gone bankrupt. Two very different endings playing out on the same stretch of pier at almost the same moment. Meanwhile, out on the water, the collapsed pilings from the park itself created a dangerous break in the surf, and local teenagers from the Zephyr Skate and Surf team claimed it as their own. Jay Adams, Tony Alva, Stacy Peralta, future legends of California skate culture, surfed what they called the Cove, a spot so tangled with broken pilings and jagged debris that outsiders stayed away out of pure fear of what was hiding under the waterline. The dead amusement park became sacred ground for a completely different subculture, one that had nothing to do with Coca-Cola exhibits or Miss Teen USA, later immortalized in Dogtown and Z-Boys and Lords of Dogtown. Pacific Ocean Park was finished as a business. As a place, it wasn't quite finished yet. Then the fires started. Abandoned wood over open water, unwatched for months at a time, doesn't need much of a reason to burn. On May 27, 1970, a blaze tore through the neighboring Aragon Ballroom and part of the old Lick Pier. More fires followed in 1971. On March 17, 1973, another fire burned through roughly 300 feet of the pier, while a crowd on shore simply watched it happen. A final major fire hit in 1974. Piece by piece, the structure 80 Hollywood artists had built to beat Disneyland was burning itself out of existence, mostly unwitnessed by a city that used to line up around the block to get inside it. By the winter of 1974 into 1975, the city of Santa Monica finished what the fires had started, tearing down whatever was left. The Starfish Gate, the glass gondolas, the diving bells, Neptune's Kingdom, all of it gone. What replaced it wasn't a ruin, and it wasn't a memorial. It was housing. The same redevelopment project that had cut off the park's access in 1965 eventually produced exactly what it was designed to produce: twin 17-story apartment towers called the Shores, and later beachfront condos called Sea Colony. Built in phases through the late 70s and 80s, nearby sits Ocean View Park, a quiet strip of city parkland sitting on the shore side of the old footprint. The place that once tried to out-Disney Disney is now mostly somewhere people pay rent to live near the beach, in buildings that exist because of the very same city project that helped kill the park in the first place. No fan campaign saved it. No last-minute buyer stepped in to reopen it smaller, the way some fading attractions limp on for years as a shrunken version of themselves. Pacific Ocean Park simply stopped, all at once, and finished disappearing in pieces over the following 7 years. Walk that stretch of coastline today between Venice's Rose Avenue lot and Santa Monica's Ocean Park lot, and there's nothing telling you what used to be there. No plaque, no sign, no hint that 80 Hollywood artists once built a submarine ride and a dolphin stadium on this exact patch of ocean. According to older accounts from local historians, the only trace left is broken pilings under the water, marked at times by warning signs about possible underwater obstructions, a detail that means nothing unless you already know the story. A Santa Monica resident named Richard Orton has spent years pushing the city for a small memorial bench inlaid with tile, telling a local paper that cities always find a way to memorialize battlefields and wars, but never a place where people simply went to have fun. As of now, that bench still doesn't exist, which means the only monument to Pacific Ocean Park is the story itself, passed along by the people who happen to remember it. So that's the real answer to how a place like this disappears. Pacific Ocean Park wasn't swallowed by the sea, and it wasn't beaten by Disneyland, even though that's the comparison everyone reaches for first. It was undercut from the inside by rides nobody had any incentive to fix, split apart by owners who kept selling pieces of it to each other, and finally cut off from its own front door by a redevelopment project that was supposed to be saving the neighborhood around it. The park drew more people in 1964 than in almost any other year of its history, and 3 years later it was bankrupt. The crowds were never really the problem. Everything holding the place together underneath them was. It was impressive. It just wasn't stable. And by the time anyone with real money at stake tried to fix that, there wasn't enough of the park left to save. What's left now is apartment buildings, a strip of city park, and a stretch of ocean where, if the old accounts are right, you can still find broken wood hiding under the waves if you know exactly where to look. 20,000 people once lined up on a Saturday morning for a chance to ride a glass gondola out over that water, waiting behind a starfish-shaped gate that isn't there anymore. Now the water just breaks over whatever's left of it, the same way it always has, as if it were never anything more than an ordinary stretch of California coast.